Thank you to the being of everything, the source of creation, for being this live webinar, for being the entire created and uncreated universe, for creating us. Thank you to the ancestors for their role in creating us. Thank you to our divinity, to our connection, to our source. Thank you for that. And always with softest gratitude, deepest gratitude to the eternal tradition of wisdom for upholding and sustaining the flow of wisdom and knowledge always. All right. Thanks everyone for being with me. Wow, during the prayer, like a whole bunch more people came in. Whoa, popped in. Okay, good. So we're ready to roll. 1 minute review of what is energy healing. Energy healing is the ability to focus attention intelligently, concisely, in order to affect healing, change, and transformation for the body, in order to uphold highest health, ultimately divine embodiment, total awakening of awareness. In energy healing, we need a context to focus awareness, because the focusing part's easy. We've always been doing that. But the hard part is, where do we focus and how do we focus in order to elicit the precise results or effects that we want from the physiology? So for that, we need a map to understand the landscape, because what we're really doing is bringing awareness around to focus on consciousness. Basically, awareness is focusing on its own nature, because awareness, pure consciousness, pure attention, pure perception is the very stuff of which the source of creation is comprised. So if everything comes from the source of creation, what we're doing is we're taking the bit of it that we own, that we have mastery over, and we're flipping it around and turning it back on the source. And that accomplishes several things. For one thing, the source of creation thrills at its own self-referral loops. So when we do that, that has this lovely nourishing effect for ourselves and for our environment, even no matter where the awareness lands, no matter where it lands, just the intention to turn it around and bring it back into the source alone has this effect of uplifting. Consciousness is like an ocean. It's big and unbounded. The universe is big. The universe is like little compared to the field of pure consciousness, to the source of the universe. The source of the universe is infinite, eternal, massive, beyond massive. So how do we find our way around? How do we navigate our little ship? We need some points of reference. So the points of reference are continuums from infinity to infinity along certain specific lines. One of them goes from concrete to abstract. That means from physical level of self down to more abstract, like mental, emotional levels of self, down to more abstract to the source of creation. You've got infinity at one end, and I talked about that yesterday, and infinity at the other end. Another point of reference is the range from horrible to wonderful, which can also go, I know, ooh, we're actually going to talk quite a bit about that today. So that also can go from infinitely horrible to infinitely wonderful. Another point of reference is from infinitely small to infinitely large. And another point of reference, one of my favorites, is from infinitely asleep to infinitely awake. And we're going to talk about that today too. Okay, so that just gives us a sense of some coordinates, so that when I make reference to them, you know what I'm talking about. Thanks for being with me on that. Okay. Yesterday, we got a lot of amazing healings went down. I encourage anybody who has issues in areas of the head, mouth, senses of perception, We talked about synchronicity. There was a very nice healing for that. Beautiful healings for the ancestors, and ended with a really amazing, massive healing for mankind that was extremely delicate and tender at the same time that it was big. So that was lots of fun, and it was very nice, but I didn't actually mention any of the things that all of us might think of when we think of our Celestial Healing Collective. I didn't mention angels or ascended masters or gods or anything like that. I didn't really talk. I kind of kept aiming at talking about how to get into that space, but today we shall. So I'm just looking for my point of reference to start. Okay, so we have this folding of creation in on itself, which is the fundamental movement of consciousness responsible for everything that's manifest, everything. And I refer to that sometimes as the divine dialogue, because it's divinity speaking to itself. It's folding in on itself. And every time it loops in a little bit of, like a little boundary or a little density, a little manifestation comes out of that folding. If we look at the divine dialogue in the context of what I would call the y-axis, which is from dense to subtle, we see the folding going from what we know as physical material reality down to what we don't know, less understood, more the unknown, into the field of silence. And then the silence warms up, and then it remanifests. And these are these 4 steps. And for those of you who studiers of Vedic science, you're probably familiar with their Sanskrit terms, which I won't bother everyone with, partly because I'm not 100% sure which term goes with which. But anyway, there's a collapse. This is the first phase of the gap, is the collapse into silence. Then the second phase of the gap is the silence, and that's infinite silence. The third phase is warming up the silence. And the fourth phase is emerging back out into the relative expression. Your Celestial Healing Collective sits at that very interesting spot between the silence and where it warms up. And it also extends the parts you're familiar with and you know about, which I said I'd mentioned it, angels and so forth. That comes at the very, very first manifestations out of the warmed up silence. So we need to look, I know why yesterday we had to be so abstract, because we're working today and yesterday in this very deep, deep level of awareness. Not at the surface where we can describe things, that's blue, that's purple. No, not so simple. It's at a very abstract level where the defined boundaries are not as well commonly experienced or well understood. Okay, so when a problem occurs, illness resides in the physiology, we start with a symptom, which is on the surface. This is the healing algorithm. It's the same as the divine dialogue. You can see lots of videos of this, and there's a page on my knowledge base. Okay, so we start with the symptom, and from the symptom, we take a dive into silence. This is a kind of you could say that awareness collapses into silence. We could say that it falls into silence. But the field of silence is the pure field of consciousness. And it's huge, it's unbounded, it's eternal, it's massive. So what's happening is we're going from an expressed value into an unmanifest, unexpressed, eternal, huge ocean of self. And in that ocean, what being can do, what it can do, is it can know itself. That's what it does. It knows itself. And because it's completely unbounded and eternal, the act of knowing itself is a kind of a collapse of the unbounded eternal nature into a point of reference. The collapse into a point of reference is the fundamental for the warming up, of the silence. So that's why I'm talking about, I know it seems really abstract, but that's why we're talking about this, is because we need to understand what exactly precisely happens at that magical spot. Because as we know from the healing algorithm, we start with the imbalance, we drop into the field of absolute silence. Out of the silence comes antidotes and solutions and healings. So what exactly happens right at that spot where the healings come out? We have to understand it. Okay, so the infinite, unbounded ocean of being looks upon its own nature. And when it looks, but it hasn't manifested anything yet. And when that happens, there's a collapse. And the collapse is from I'm infinite, unbounded, absolute nature to I am infinite, unbounded, absolute nature looking at myself. As soon as it does that, divisions are created. The division of I who is looking, myself who's being looked at, the act of looking, right? So that's the very delicate dynamic that's going on down at that level. And so a three in one division is created. Out of this 3 in 1 division, because it stays in silence, there's also a 2 division. There's a I'm infinite, unbounded silence, I've collapsed. Those two are also happening. So, and then in that collapse, it says, oh, but I'm really 3. So in the 2 strokes of I'm infinite, unbounded, and I've collapsed, we can also see the 2 sides of the divine dialogue, or the 2 strokes of the healing algorithm, which is I've collapsed. I collapse into the silence. And from the silence, it's like, oh, wow, I created something. And the solution creates forward. Okay, so that's the context. It's a little abstract, but we're going to play with it a little bit so we kind of get to know it better in the context of more healing for everyone. So looking into the group at this point, thank you everyone for being with me. It's very exciting. And what I'm feeling is just a very, very tender, very delicate little waking up of understanding. Waking up. And so what this means is we've made contact with a part of our own being, the part of our celestial healing collective, which knows, the part which knows, oh, there was a big healing for that yesterday too. That's why we had to have that healing yesterday. Very good. Don't forget to double check that somewhere near the end of yesterday's session. So the part that knows wakes up. Now what it's doing is it's illuminating the emergence of pure consciousness or awareness from the source. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at, let's see, this level. If we've got our y-axis from very concrete down to very subtle, we're going to look at these 2 deep levels. This is pure silence and this is warmed up silence, okay? But we're going to look at this level, which is the causal level of self. And the reason is that's where we actually find those structures of self that we identify with healing angels and forms of intelligence and capability which have the power to influence natural law. They have the power to work with the laws of nature and create specific effects. Everything is born out of that silence, right? So really that's the real key, and it's that spot right between the silence and the warmed up silence. That's where everything comes. We mustn't forget that. That's the witness. That's the part that's looking at these more expressed forms. Now, this causal body, I haven't really done a video on it, but I should. The causal body is understood in 7 sheaths or layers. So the more compactified layers are closer to the physiology, and then the less compactified layers are further out, and they can go way out, like way out. It's kind of like a very big level of self. So the causal level, the physiology, is the deepest, most refined physical manifested expression of the physiology. So at that level, we are all like as big as the universe, right? Because as long as we can conceive, as long as you can think, oh, there is a universe, that means there's a part of you that's as big as the universe. If you thought it, the thought was as big as the universe, that belonged to you. So at the surface, we're a little person, so many feet tall, so many inches wide. And then as we get into the deeper, more abstract levels of self, we get really big, all the way big to as big as the universe. So the outermost sheath, the most abstract sheath, the sheath that's closest to the silence, is big. 7 sheaths, or 7 rays. Sometimes they call them the 7 rays of the causal body, or 7 layers, however you like to define it. The inner layers are universal expressions of self, which we talked about a bit yesterday when I referenced archetypes. And I would say that first layer, that first closest layer to the physiology, is the layer where you find your archetypes. The next layer out is where you find the divine beings, the celestial beings, the devas, the angels, these expressions of self. The next layer out is where we find the larger, more like intense, profound, longer lived beings, more invincible beings. And then the next layer out, the 4th layer out, we find the gods and the pantheons of gods are in the 4th layer. And they sit at a kind of gap between aspects or expressions of self which have animate qualities to them, like the gods. You kind of think of them as like, well, they kind of look like humans, right? See these lovely paintings of them. They have heads and eyes and noses, just like we do. So, so there's still an element of, oh yeah, I can kind of relate to that. It's sort of like me. But it sits at the junction between the part that I could relate to, kind of seems like me, to the part that doesn't seem like me. And those last 3 layers represent the realms of creation, from smaller realms to larger realms. And so what this means is that there is an aspect of all of us which is large enough that it's not like a person, it's like a place, if that makes sense. And this is the realms are very important parts of our celestial healing collective, because any healing that we decide to do for ourselves is going to be founded on positioning, self-positioning. I talked a lot about that yesterday in terms of balance, but self-positioning in a space of creation where the laws of nature support that particular healing process. And it's like, you've heard me say this before, it's like a house. In the house, there's a room, there are rooms that are better for cooking and other rooms that are better for sleeping. We don't go to the cooking room to sleep because that just wouldn't work. We don't go to the sleeping room to cook, right? So the realms of creation go from smaller realms to larger realms. And they even go from like very, very, very small. So each cell has its own little home, its own little homey realm around it like that, all the way out to vast universal size realms. And the realms house the laws of nature. They provide context for the laws of nature. And there are many realms that I know of. I've done a lot of exploring in that area. I needed to because it helps people heal, but also it's fascinating. And it's the armchair traveler here. It's a beautiful field of exploration. It's a beautiful field. All of the sizes and contexts and types of realms range along the x-axis. They have their range along the along the x-axis from like not pleasant to very pleasant. And that's important. That's important when it comes to beings like angels. I actually just am going to read part of this question because a question came in, and I feel that this lady who is like an angel, she's an angel, who asked this question really hit it on the head. And I'd like to kind of keep this question close for the whole of today's webinar. descriptions of what the experiences of our celestial healing collective might be like, how one might experience this as angelic or ascended masters, as you mentioned last night. More specifics about the mechanics of how we gain help from this celestial healing collective within us. Awesome. Just awesome. So as I mentioned before, oh, another question coming in too. As I mentioned before, awareness folds in on itself. We access the various areas of our celestial healing collective, which, as I mentioned, sits at the causal level of self, by turning attention to that area. For some of us, we've known that area as the finest level of feeling, right? That's a familiar name, finest level of feeling. So within the context of the finest level of feeling, there are larger and smaller expressions of self. The reason I'm smiling is because we access these larger and smaller areas of self, and we explore the mechanics of the gap between unmanifest and manifest, between, infinite silence and warmed up silence. And then also in the causal level of the physiology, where we go from expressions of self that are like yourself to expressions of self that are like realms, right in there, right in that area where I mentioned that we find the gods. That's the area where the very same kind of transformation that takes place in the gap between infinite silence and warmed up infinite silence, that same process is reflected and expressed at that level of the causal body between the forms of self that are like me and the forms of self that are me as a region or a realm. There's something interesting is happening. There's a dynamic that's happening there, and we can talk about it in those terms because that's a little bit more accessible than talking about it in the extreme abstract of silence folding in on itself, witnessing itself, and giving rise to the threefold structure, and that gives rise to a sixfold structure, which gives rise to a tenfold structure, and then and on and on. It's very kind of intellectual, and we're at the point of our artwork. We're creating it as an artwork where we're enjoying more the blissful pop music and making things look like things. You know, like our painting looked like this last night, and now today we want it to look more defined. We want to see all the pretty flowers. So in that point between the gods and the realms, really within the hearts of the gods, the God, in that point, we explore. Every one of us has been exploring for decades in the junction between dreaming and sleeping. The junction between dreaming and sleeping. What happens in that junction? For those who have awareness in deep sleep, awareness in deep sleep, anyone? Awareness in deep sleep? Oh, we got some little fingers up. That's good. Oh, hand raised, yes. So for those, oh, yay. Yay. Oh, yay. I love you guys. Beautiful. So for those with awareness in deep sleep, what we do in deep sleep is we move from the quiet, it's a state of deep quiet in the body, deep healing silence, into the first warmed up expression. Thank you. There's a chat that just came in and said she loves being part of this so much. Oh, I love you being here. So, just in case this little box is going to show on the closing it there. All right. So we're in deep sleep, in deep silence. And then the deep silence starts to wake up into dreaming. At first, it doesn't become full dreaming. At first, it becomes, oh, I'm really glad I picked this background. At first, it becomes something like this area of my backdrop. For those of you who can't see this, you'll have to catch it on the replay. That that first division into three becomes very abstract, very soft expressions of three values that interact harmoniously. For me, when I first noticed it years ago, it looked like getting my mouse out of the middle of my nose here. Let's see, how do we get that mouse out of there? Okay, thank you. Go sit over there. Okay. That first warming up from deep sleep into dreaming was like being in an ocean of color or something. It was just very sort of soft, abstract, not well defined forms which still made sense to me. You know, like just a warmth, a warm color or a cool color. And then the colors started to associate with specific I would say definitions of feeling. The warm color would make me feel a certain way. The cool color would make me feel a certain different way, like that. But simple, right? Simple, basic, like when you were a little kid and you were playing with finger paints or something. You had red and yellow and blue. And you can do anything you want with them. And what you discovered was if I started mixing red and yellow and blue, I got brown. But also what we discovered was we started to get these very interesting, there'd be places in the painting where you get really interesting effects. You know, you get some red, but then some blue would go over part of it. And it would crackle apart a little bit and you get a little bit of red coming through the blue like that, you know? So over time, the awareness starts to define those abstract elements, those three abstract elements, and starts combining them in different ways to produce something that's more concrete, something that looks like the dream of a flower, right? So this is where we experiment. This is where we play. It's completely safe. And in this part of the webinar, healing for everyone in the webinar in their junction between deep sleep and dream, to wake it up. We're waking up the soul of the seer. Yesterday, we defined Shanmukha. There's a name. There's their name, Skanda. They're different names for the seer, but it doesn't matter. The important thing is this knower of reality is the essential self. And the essential self is present at every point of your reality, including the deepest part of deep sleep. So from the deepest part of deep sleep, from the deep silence, he awakens, she awakens, they awaken, they awaken. This is one, I would say, possibly the greatest and most important essential player in your celestial healing collective is the knower, the seer, the witnesser, the eye of the eye. And what we're doing is it's going into the gap. I'm seeing it affecting the hippocampus in people's brains. Hippocampus also looks like cerebellum. Also, I'm seeing a line of energy moving from the back of the head up through to the Ajna chakra. So the Ajna chakra is receiving a download right now regarding the specifics of owning full wakefulness in the junction between deep sleep and dream state. And this awakening that's occurring in the brain, it's like a little rewiring is taking place there. And there are little, several different things. There's bliss in it. It's opening up the dopaminergic pathways. And this is a healing for that part of the physiology for those who have any little tendencies or moving in any way towards PD or anything like that. That's clearing that. Also, flags are being set up, little like road markers, if you will, something like that. Some kind of little points of reference are being set up for each person so that the point of reference triggers when we start to move from deep sleep to dream. So that we have what it does is it supports that. It's like a little reminder. It's like a little gift of bliss that you get at that moment that lets you wake up enough that you get to just really enjoy the process, witness the process, but not so much that it jars a person out of sleep by any means. In fact, the rest in the body deeper, right? The rest in the body going deeper, going deeper, going deeper, going deeper. I'm looking at the physiology, also for people who have sleep anomalies or sleep concerns with their sleep patterns. Here, what I'm seeing for those who have concerns with their sleep patterns is that there is a structure of the Celestial Healing Collective, Nidra, which is responsible for sleep. It's like an overseeing intelligence for sleep. It's really a mode of functioning of the human nervous system. Nidra is a mode of functioning of our human nervous systems, which is both a mode of functioning, but also a lively, intelligent, sentient expression of self. Oh, looking at our 7 sheaths of the causal body, Nidra sits. I'm asking, I've never asked this before. Thank you, everyone, for this healing, because I'm getting it too, right? So I get to sleep well too. Yay. Nidra sits near the outer edges of the 2nd sheath. So Nidra is very, very close to the 3rd sheath of the causal body. And what I'm seeing, and this is me learning right now, something I didn't know before, but as soon as I put my attention, I turned my attention, my awareness into Nidra, and what I see is that she says, feminine, it's a feminine form. She says, I have a range. I'm not just in the 3rd sheath, and I'm not just in the 2nd sheath. I have a range. That makes sense. And she also says she has a realm. She has realms that are her specific realms where she likes to hang out. Very cool. So these parameters for this structure, which is responsible for luscious, deep, nourishing, rejuvenating sleep, are being defined for everyone in this healing session so that all of our sleeps are upgraded and improved. Falling asleep is easier, being there is deeper, even having awareness there is better. There's less waking up in the night. If you do happen to wake up, the sleep comes again very easily. Nice, long, 8.5, 9-hour sleeps. Luscious. Waking up feeling rejuvenated. I'm seeing a bunch of questions coming in, so I'm going to get to those next. But I just want to say one more thing about the Celestial Healing Collective. And it's a very interesting point, is that I mentioned that all of the Celestial Healing Collective is an expression of one's own self. It can be identified and located in the physiology. So that's very cool. But the other thing that's interesting about it is I wanted to bring in this concept of the x-axis that ranges from really awful to really wonderful, and say that the forms that we use in energy healing, I'm getting a download, even before I finish my sentence. So the forms that we use in energy healing, those aspects, divine, heavenly, angelic, godlike aspects of self, they tend to reside, like Nidra was saying, she resides in a particular realm or range. Oh, let's see, that was my hellish range. Let's go over here to the heavenly range. So reside just in a portion of that x-axis. This is why it makes sense that those beings that we have so revered and so adored and set up a loving relationship with over the centuries, why we are not tiny, small, insignificant beings compared to that aspect of ourself. Because as humans, I've said this many times, we own the whole x-axis. We own the whole thing. And balance can be A balance point is the point where we connect in with wholeness or totality, with the source of creation. So essentially, even when you're being gripped by the worst of symptoms or pain or discord, balance even can be found there. Balance can be found at any point along the x-axis. This is a little bit new from what I was saying before. Before I was saying, well, you've got your hell and you've got your heaven and you got to find yourself in the middle. Yes, that's also true, but it's also very important to know that wholeness and totality is present at every point. So even in the grip of the worst conditions and situations, balance can still be found. And from that balance, the counterpart arrives, the antidote, the completion to the incompletion. So these structures, angels, gods, ascended masters, great beings of all various types, they reside in this gentle, loving range, the softer end of the x-axis. All right. There's more to be said about those realms, but I think I'm going to go to questions because we've got a bunch of them coming up here. And I do love to answer everyone's questions. Okay. Okay, so one person says, one person's come in with a very specific health concern. So I will address that if I can, but I'd like to address the more those that are more specifically related to today's topic first, because I don't want to lose the continuum of what we're doing with that. So thank you very much, everyone, for your questions. I really appreciate it. I would imagine being in a particular realm and then asking for the answer to the healing. Yes. So locating oneself in a specific realm is a matter of invoking the realm. So you know it because it has a certain feel to it. And just for everyone's information, there are realms, there's a realm specific for structuring. There's a realm specific for knowing. There's a realm specific for actually healing. There are there are many very beautiful, very heavenly realms for awakening. There's specific also, very highest realm for awakening, for enlightenment, for relationships. There are places where the laws of nature are given to promote easy flow of awareness, easily focusing attention, right, on those specific areas. And you can imagine the realms for knowing all things, access to the Akashic record and all the great archives of creation, very, very closely linked to the area for awakening or enlightenment. Yes? Makes sense. But also health. Do people around me are down with sickness and upset stomachs feel I may be going that way too? Oh, is there a system I can ask my healing celestial team to help me so that I don't get properly too ill? Thank you. And so that's also specific. And then I think I'll bring in this other one, the first question too. The other person has autoimmune disease and getting fevers. So is there a way to influence health, or surrender and meditation the only way? Beautiful questions. All right. Both questions relate to immune system. Immune system has its roots here in the astral body. So we have our celestial healing collective here at a deeper, more profound, more broad-based position in the causal body. And then there's also karmas can be found here. And then that relates to the immune system, which has its roots in the astral body. The astral body is a form which is your connection to the environment internally and externally. It is it is the part of the physiology responsible for the relationship between sense of individuality and sense of universality, if you will. And it's also part of a sort of great filtering system in the subtle regions of consciousness, which allow us to create those belief systems or the scaffolding on which experience hangs. Okay, so there is a member of your Celestial Healing Collective, which is responsible for, which is like an angelic overseer, you could say, is the administrator of the immune system. All the systems. For anybody who wants, you can refer back to my video that I put up last weekend on nagas, because I do, and I've got a page on my knowledge base about nagas as well. So I encourage everyone to look at that, because when we're talking about the different systems of the body, whether it's the immune system or circulatory or digestive or whatever, we're talking about connecting up with the naga, the overseeing intelligence of that system. The nagas are thread-like forms of being. And you're saying, well, where are they in here? Are they in my causal body? No, they're not. The nagas, the nagas are very interesting because they range all the way from unmanifest. They're anchored at both ends in infinity. And this is on the website, not to waste people's time too much because we've got more questions popping in. But the principle is from infinity, they form a thread or a channel, a stream of divine flow of pure being, pure awareness, pure perception, pure consciousness. So it's like a river. And they come into the body. And when they come into the body, the human body is like this lovely, perfect, yummy, amazing vessel for these forms of consciousness that are like streams to fold in on themselves. So they start folding in on themselves at this point. They come into the body, and as soon as they hit that Hriddya Mahamarma, they start spinning like crazy. And they spin, and as they spin tighter and tighter and tighter, first they form the energy levels of the physiology. So they literally form, where's my causal body? They literally form the causal body. The causal body is made out of one of these great ropes of light force, which has spun in on itself. And then it becomes more dense and more dense and more dense, and eventually becomes so many layers of spinning that it actually becomes the physical form of the body. So that intelligence, now there's a great form that comes into the body, but it splits off. It's got smaller forms. So there's one for the digestion and one for the circulatory and one for the immune system and nervous system and so forth. So what we're doing now is, how do we find the naga of the immune system? How do we find the naga of the immune system? And for everybody over at my Goddess of Scotland's house, awareness focuses. We know the soul of the immune system, the administrator of the immune system, is the thymus, which is right here in the chest. So awareness goes there. And as awareness goes there, you approach your thymus as you would a friend. You approach with gratitude and love and appreciation, understanding, compassion, empathy, sympathy, right? No demanding, just sweetness. And first the awareness approaches, and then the awareness falls into infinite silence. Because, as I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, the fall into silence thrills the entire creation. So what happens is awareness is folding in on itself. The body is also awareness, right? It's like formed of awareness. So awareness falls into the heart of the immune system, and it creates a self-referral loop of self-knowing itself. And that self-knowing itself reflects into the field of pure, unmanifest, silent ocean of being, which also does the same thing. And what I feel when I'm doing it with myself, and I know that because I have set myself up to be the reflection, to be the mirror of everyone here, when I do this, What I experience is waves of love. I experience waves of love. And for some people, like really, really intense waves of love that bring one to tears, waves of love, like so, so sweet, so tender. We want to take that tender flow and we want to offer it back into silence again. Because from the silence, that tenderness stabilizes. It goes through that little transformation that we talked about at the beginning, and it comes back with stability. And from a practical level, it comes back with the wisdom of knowing what needs to transform in the physiology in order to support health. I'm noticing that for the people in Scotland, there's fear that's worked its way into the system. It's went its way into the system. And so that fear is being released from the point, the immune system point. And the fear of overwhelmed emotions. Same with our other lady also in Holland. There are layers and layers of discordant feelings sitting there. Now, remember I talked about the realm from really awful to really wonderful. So a lot of times the discordant feelings are born in that area, those realms of creation that are more sinister, if you will. Maybe that sinister is a good word, or at least aligned with the breaking down or the dissolution of the relative, the shifting. So those discordant feelings, they're not just sitting in the body. They have their own little threads or cords that connect them into those darker areas of creation. And in the darker areas of creation, so they're little cords, right? So I'm used to looking at this stuff. So what I do is I see the discordant feelings, then I see the cords, and I'm telling you what I'm doing, because you can do this too. Then I'm following the cord like a little path back to its source. Well, where did it come from? Well, I'm going to look over here. So I'm looking over here where it comes from. And what I find in the darker realms of creation are two energies that are they're at the base of these cords. One of them is a feeling of lack and fear. The fear is associated with that feeling of, well, I'm just not going to get what I want. The other one, there was some anger too. And that one connected to another little cord that goes back to an energy that's a little bit like maliciousness, a little bit like the tendency or willingness to do anything in order to get what you want, to get your way, including if that means not being nice to other people or creating damage or wounding or abusing. So those are the energies that are at the foundation of those little cords that are going to the immune system. So the cords are nagas, right? They connect everything. The cords that make up the whole web of life, they connect everything. But the energy that, what we've done is we've gone and we found the seed of the imbalance. And the seed of the imbalance is offered into the field of pure silence. Pure silence loves it when we put our attention on it. Pure silence loves it when it puts attention on itself through us, as us. It doesn't matter whether it's malicious or happy or whatever, it doesn't matter. We flop back into silence, and from silence, bliss comes out. The antidote comes out. The antidote came out even before we followed the cords, remember? I said, oh, it's going in, and bliss is being created, some happiness, some joy. And then the feelings of love, all the friendship feelings came. The friendship feelings wash away the particular qualities that are sitting in that darker realm of creation. It's not that they wash away. It's like, think of them as sound waves that cancel each other out. That's what it's like. You've got this quality of lack and maliciousness on one hand, and then you've got these qualities that we associate with friendship on the other hand, which when you have friends, you don't have lack, right? When you have friends, you don't think about, when you have friends that love you and support you and provide what you provide you and you provide them, then you don't think, oh, well, how can I like really screw over this person so I can get something I want from them? No, you don't think that. It's just, it's simpler than that. And all of it's being created within the self. All of it's actually being created and produced right in this area of the body, because any part of the body can create and produce any kind of energy, wave of intelligence or expression of intelligence and creativity. Okay, so that's a healing for the immune system. Also, for my dears who brought these questions in, please check out my website, Knowledge Base Infections, and you will get more yummy, good information about clearing infections. Here's another question. Dear Dorothy, can we do healing for feeling that how much we are trying, we are still not gaining our goal in this life? Ooh, okay, that's a really, really good question. Also, oh, someone else has immune deficiency too. I'm just rolling through the questions kind of fast. I'm going to do that question because that's a really good question and I have a lot I'd like to say about it, but I want to answer this one in one word. Someone said, oh, what is PD? Because I mentioned PD earlier. Sorry, everyone. Parkinson's disease. Parkinson's disease is a byproduct of losing certain qualities that are in cells that are deep, deep within the brain that create color in the cells. It's the pigment in the cells. And that gets lost. And then that part of the brain isn't able to produce dopamine. Okay. Okay, so let's go to this question from Croatia, which is really, thank you for that. Thank you so much. I'd like to say to the lady who asked this question, I have been thinking about this question really, really a lot in the last week. So I love that we're kind of on the same wavelength. So I'm just going to say her question again, because this is a question has a lot of juice in it. The question is, can we do a healing for the feeling that no matter how much we're trying, no matter how much we do, we still just aren't gaining our goal? How many people have had that experience at some point? Yeah, right? All the hands go up. I'm doing everything I can. And yeah, oh, look at this. 4 or 5 different people raise hands over here too. Yeah. Yeah, that's really a bummer when that happens, isn't it? So, well, almost everyone. I'm closing them. People keep raising hands and I keep closing the hand raise box and then it keeps opening more. Good. Well, we needed to talk about this, didn't we? So this particular effect, I would say, is possibly one of the most damaging experiences that people have. One of the experiences that people have which leaves a person feeling bitter and discouraged and like giving up. You know, if you've got a set of parameters or a set of rules, you know, like when we're little, we're taught by our parents like how to get along in society and how to get along with others and how to play the game, right? And it should be that if you follow the rules and you play the game the way it's supposed to be played, that you win. At least you win some of the time, you know, a few of the times. The thing about Monopoly is the rules don't change. And the thing about life is that they do change. So depending, and like I've been laying out this whole idea of different realms and stuff, all the different realms have different rules in them. It becomes a very complicated game at that point. And what is correct action in one place is not correct action in the other place, right? I used to give the example, it's good to not have any clothes on in the shower, but that's about the only place, right? Everywhere else, you better have clothes on. So the rules change. They change. The other thing is that the nature of the evolutionary process is that when we are in our optimal state of evolution, it's a state that's partly comfortable in that the rules that we know we can count on, but also partly uncomfortable because we're being continuously faced with new input and new information, which causes or elicits a growth response. If we're 100% on one side or 100% on the other side, life is horrible. Life is in the hellish range, okay? If life is only the rules and regulations that I personally know of and that I'm comfortable with, then life becomes very rigid and very stuck and very solid, and it doesn't go anywhere. It becomes boring and awful, and we find ourselves self-creating dramas just so that life isn't so darned boring. On the other side, if life is just one unexpected, unknown challenge after another, it feels like life is collapsing into chaos, and that also is no good. So what we need is a spot in the middle. So when we do our best, and we're trying our best at every point, and things don't turn out the way expected, realize that this is actually a gift. Because if every single time everything always turned out exactly as you expected, there would be no reason for humans. That's where God was before humans were created, right? God was like, I am everything. I know everything. There's nothing that's outside my range. How boring that was. Then we were made. We're so interesting. Because we're only picking it up in pieces. And so from our little pieces, we get these really deep, in-depth looks, and we get to see things from very specified angles. And our human nervous systems provide a perspective on the vision of divinity, which is extremely fascinating. Look how fascinating. Life is weird, but it's interesting, right? So if you do everything that you know is right, and you still fail, it is actually a gift. If you fail in a way that creates horrible suffering, then it means you have to be very alert. We talked about this a little bit yesterday. The response to the suffering, the response to the chaos, is to watch with wide eyes open. We must look very, very carefully, very bluntly, very completely at every detail of what's going on, because there is an answer. There is an answer. Every time the world collapses in chaos, there is within that chaos the seeds of order. And the trick is to maintain balance during the chaos. Not to get gripped by it. Remember, the hellish end of creation and the heavenly end of creation are only a little tiny, tiny part of who we are. So we need to own the whole field. We need to stand up to our human capacity to have a broad perspective on reality, own the whole field, know, yes, I'm being gripped by this horrible pain right now, but I can maintain my balance. I can find myself in the point of balance, and I can move through this with grace. There is an antidote, and it's within the darkness. It's inside the darkness. So I need to look carefully in a state of calmness and balance, and the answer will reveal itself. It will. Think of the yin-yang symbol. The yin-yang symbol is actually a visual representation of the divine dialogue. And within each of those paisleys is the seed of the other one. And that's because at any time, and I mentioned this yesterday, and I saw it make a little ripple of fear through the group, but I'll say it again, maybe you guys will be a little tougher today, that at any time when life is in a state of order, it could collapse into chaos. And at any time when life is in a state of absolute chaos, it can blossom forth into order. The seeds are contained within those fields. And it is around the edges. This is when I was talking, remember I was talking about how there's the silence and then there's the warmed up silence. And right in the edge between them is where the transformation occurs. Well, it's right in the edge between black paisley and the white paisley. There we go, yin yang. Right between the black paisley and the white paisley, it's in the edge where the transformation occurs. And each paisley has its little circle, right? And it's in the edge around the circle also where the transformation occurs. So we place awareness at the edge, at the balance between order and chaos. And in that point, the human nervous system, the human psyche, the human physiology functions at maximum efficiency. Why do I love these webinars? Because I don't know what the heck's coming next, man. Why do I love it that you ask questions? Because we've got our foundation of orderliness, right? We've got our roadmap to the ocean of consciousness, and we've got some basic understandings of like the healing algorithm. But then we start looking at stuff, immune deficiency or PD or whatever, and it's very exciting because that's the chaos. And without it, we wouldn't be making progress. So we need that. Okay. So several more questions. Okay, one person just said, some people do, I'm afraid. So that was probably in response to something else. So please forgive. Not sure what that was response to. One person says, how to heal or help others without me being involved. Very simple. You leave it to the department of the Almighty. They're laughing over here because that's a quote. It's a beautiful quote. To my team, if my husband, my one member of my team, my husband is still here, can you write down that we'll send that quote to everyone, the department of the Almighty? But I'll talk about it for a moment, because the quote is beautiful, but it's also very succinct. Oh, we've got a chat coming in here. Hang tight. I'm going to talk about the Almighty. This morning I dreamed that people were avoiding what seemed like poison or darkness, but when they actually got covered in poison, they became superheroes. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, that's very cool. So that's a beautiful dream. Look what you're doing in your dreams. Look how you are structuring. Do you want me to read that for everyone again? She dreamed that people were avoiding what seemed like being covered in poison or darkness, but when they actually got covered in poison, they became superheroes. Way cool. Way cool. Because it makes you strong, because it shows you a part of self which also has strength and power in it. And the thing about that strength and power is if we, oh, one lady's saying the topic of chaos results in her stomach churning. That's probably probably some purification going there. The point is that if we avoid our own darkness, then it bubbles up to the surface out of control. But if we face our own darkness, if we get to know it, we learn how to manage it with balance. And when it's managed with balance, it's no longer darkness, it's no longer poison. It becomes a very useful tool for manifesting all sorts of things that we couldn't manifest before. But you can't master it without getting in there and getting the feet wet. So that's why I'm encouraging everyone. That's why we're doing it together as a group in a safe space. That's why I was mentioning my question box back up here again. That's why I was mentioning the realms, because some realms of creation have laws of nature that make it safer to work with your own inner darknesses. And I know that word darkness has some negative connotations. Really what it is are the laws of nature that disintegrate or collapse or destroy the relative is what it really is. That's what that really is. And that's overseen by Shiva, right? Shiva, the destroyer of ignorance, for the sake of establishing holy silence. It's just a cycle. It's just conscious. Everything is consciousness folding in on itself, yeah? Okay, question. Can you also talk about healing the brain from injury, concussion? looking. I'm focusing my awareness. You can focus your awareness too on the area where the damage was done. There are structures of the Celestial Healing Collective. The ones we're looking at now are, remember I mentioned 7 sheaths, right? 7 sheaths in the causal body. The one sheath that's closest to the physiology, the devas. The body is full of devas. The devas range from, larger, like human size angelic forms down to very, 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 very tiny forms. And they're sweet. They're sweet beings. They sit over in the heavenly realm, in the body, in the heavenly realm. And they move about in the body. Because their physiologies are not physical like ours. So they're in a limited realm this way, and they're also in a limited realm this way, right? Because they don't become full physical, or very, very rarely. So we've got beings who reside in just a little realm like this. They move about freely in the physiology with intention. Wherever your attention goes, they are there. They are there with the attention, and the intention to heal. In the case of a concussion, there is hardened blood, they're blood clots, basically, and also I'm seeing some damaged tissue. So we happen to create new neural cells, new neurons and new brain cells in our brains, in the hippocampus area. So new healthy cells are being produced all the time. They just need to be located. They need to be transported to the location where the damage is. So any blockages in the path of transport, in the transport path, and I'm seeing blockages, energetic blockages in the forms of beliefs. Beliefs set in. God bless our world that we live in. But anybody who tells you that doesn't heal. And along with the beliefs, they're locked in with discordant feelings. So those dissolve. And I'm just speaking what the body's intelligence is doing, what it knows. It knows to dissolve the discordant feelings. It knows to dissolve those unuseful beliefs that are in the pathway that are stopping the healthy cells from getting in and repairing the damaged tissue. Also, we need some dissolving. This is mastering the dark side, right? The inner monster destroys. So we need to actually dissolve some blood in there. We need to dissolve some of the material that's in that part of the head that's not serving and is not allowing for the healthy reconstruction of the area. When we're afraid and just running away from the darkness, then we can't use it to help ourselves. But when you know it's there, then it's possible to harness it with intelligence. The devas do it. They start with you when you're in the uterus. They start with a tiny little building of the body, and they stay with the body all through the entire life. Sing to them. Give them your love as they work. They love that. I found almost every time I had a big activation of devas in my physiology, music was playing too. But of course, I love music, right? I kind of have that musical background thing going. So for me, it was that. But they do love to be nourished with that which is beautiful, aesthetically pleasing. Give them anything beautiful. Give them beautiful pictures. Give them beautiful music. And they will work harder for you. It's a way of showing love. It's like a communication with them in a language they understand. The language of perception and experience. It's a universal language. Okay, guys. Okay, we're getting close. We got a few more questions here. I hope that helps. I love you. May you heal fully. And a lot of the work will be done at night in your sleep. The healing we did for sleep is very good for supporting greater rejuvenation of the physiology during sleep time. So use that. Okay. How to heal or help others without me being involved. Department of the Divine. So what's going on there is that essentially one heals oneself. Essentially, the best healing, the most powerful healing comes directly from the source of creation, directly to the physiology, which is the vehicle of the source of creation, which is the expression, which is the source of creation. It's the whole source too, the whole source. So that's the best healing. So how do we help others? So what I do is I support with my awareness, because essentially the whole healing process is a process of focusing awareness, right? So when a person is feeling very ill, what's frequently happening is they've got a symptom on the surface, but the awareness isn't really getting into the spot that it needs to be to actually like get to the seed of the awareness or the source of it, you know, to break it apart and identify it and help unpack it. It's those big suitcases full of unpacked discordant feelings that give people a lot of trouble, right? That's when you start getting back pain and that sort of thing. So unpacking it, providing another eye open, providing another witness. Anyone can look at their own business, but when you only have one eye open, you don't get the perspective that you get when you have two. So the value of having a friend or someone to sit with is that you're able to benefit from their awareness as well as your own. And because awareness, pure awareness, is being, it's only one being. It's not even their awareness. It's just one awareness. There's just one awareness. Being does it. The answer is any kind of personal involvement damages any kind of like egoic involvement, if you will, any part of like, oh, I did that to them. Any kind of degree of I'm doing it results in then I'm also taking on the imbalance. So as long as one is able to recognize the mechanics are that I am providing what my resource, which is my awareness, to help shine the light of perception for this person, but they're healing themselves, then it's done. And in the case, for example, of the person with the brain injury, I was talking about getting awareness, and we're all focusing our awareness on those devas, right? Oh, God, you're so sweet. Thank you, Isabel. She's saying she's beyond honored infinitely. You are sitting with me. Oh, my goodness. Isabel always makes my heart melt till I'm going to cry. So sweet. You are so sweet. I love you so much. Thank you. I feel the same. So we sit together, right? We sit together, but it is the individual's own healing potential which does the work for them. And we share that healing potential, because if I start up here physical material and I get broader and more expanded and more abstract, then by the time I get to my causal body, which is as big as the universe, then it obviously is going to overlap with your causal body, right? So part of the deal is I've become familiar with my causal body. I've become familiar with Nidra and Narasimha and Shanmukha and different forms. I mean, those are Vedic names, but those you don't have to go with Vedic names. You can just go with Western names for them. You know, the Lord of Sleep, the Lord of Chaos, the Lord of Knowingness, whatever, or however you want to say it. But familiar, so that when I sit with you and my attention is on that aspect of being, which is shared between us, it wakes it up. And then it's like we play a game, you know, like, okay, I'll do this and you do this. And like we kind of, you know, we do it together, and it's very sweet. And I heal too. So it's an honor for me. Thank you. Okay, another person. I still feel too much imbalance on the side of the collapse into unexpected chaos. Okay. So the person says, I still feel too much imbalance on the side of collapse into unexpected chaos. So what I do, I love giving you guys the inside scoop here. So what I do is I feel what you're feeling. Like I make my nervous system like a mirror, right? Because we're all mirrors of divine being. So what that means is divine being is feeling a little bit more sort of gripped and oriented and has more cords and connections into the collapsing side, and then has little feelings, discordant feelings of fear that have locked those connections in. Habits, right? Habits of being on the sort of the distress side of the process. So I'm looking at that, and when I look at that, I see ancestral patterns. So that means those habits were learned habits. Like, I'll do this and you do this. So mom's like, well, I'll do this. And your little kid like, okay, I'll do this, you know. So ancestral patterns going back decades, generations, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 edging on 7, depending on which lines we take. 6 edging on 7 that are directly playing into this feeling and the fear and the discord associated with it. So I would say, and we're actually over our time. Oh, and there are actually a bunch of really cool questions yet to go. Oh, you guys. Okay, so what we're going to have to do is, I think I'm going to gracefully finish this question. And then what I'm going to do is I'll go back and look at everyone else's questions and see what I can do in terms of either answering them for you individually, or what I also love to do sometimes is make some videos for everybody and bring the question out to the whole collective of creation, because the collective of YouTube, or, you know, our world, our internet world, because your questions are so precious and they're so good. They're so important. And you are the voice of the collective. When we're here in our healing circle, we are very in touch with those more collective levels of who and what we are. It's a practice. It's an exercise in that. It's precious. So thank you. So just the final question then. Too much on the side of collapse. When I look at the ancestors, what I see is power. They wanted power, because that's what you get on the side of collapse. You master your own darkness, and when you master your darkness, then you, using highest moral index, using your integrity, when you make friends with you face to face with your greatest fears, it becomes evident how the areas which are challenging, which have the potential to break stuff down, right? Remember, guys, I went through an illness before I started doing this more for everybody. You know, it was more of an internal thing. I quietly, for years and years and years, had this seeing ability and found myself going around at night, you know, visiting women who were abused by their husbands and, you know, doing different healing stuff for years and years. But it didn't come to the surface until I went through my own illness. And when I became so sick that I wasn't able to put my clothes on in the morning, I came face to face with my monster, my inner monster. I found that there was a part of me that wasn't very patient, and it wasn't very nice sometimes. And there were big pockets of anger and lots of other kinds of discordant feelings and ego and all kinds of stuff. There was all kinds of garbage that had been sitting under the surface because I was so busy being an angel and taking care of everybody but never myself, right? And just self-sacrificing, that this whole area like built up. But coming face to face with it and realizing that I have the capacity and potential to like raise my voice and yell really loud, I could do that. Not that I would. But the thing is, because I know I can do it now, because I know it, I'm a little scary. I'm scarier if I don't know it. If I don't know it, it bubbles up to the surface and it makes a mess of my world. But if I know it, then I can say to it, I've got a hold on you here. I recognize you. I honor you as part of myself. Let us work together. And what do? I pick up my flute and I make beautiful music, and it's really loud. Right? But it's like a harnessing of that energy, right? So I hope that helps. And your question's so profound and it's so amazing. You know, if I can find other ways to reformat that answer, I will. Like, hopefully we'll have a page on the knowledge base at some point and that kind of thing. Oh yeah, she's saying she liked what I said last month about developing a little fierceness. Yeah, it's better. It's better if you go into a social situation and people look at you and they say, I should be a little careful around this person, you know, than saying, oh, I could just walk all over this person, right? Wouldn't you rather be the person that they say, oh, I should be a little careful and they will treat me nicely because they are an honorable, noble person, than just walking in and just like, oh, I can kick that person in the face and they won't do anything. You know, right? So anyway, I love you guys. Thank you for everything. Sorry I went a little over time, but it was so much fun answering your questions. And I promise I will connect with everybody who answered a question that didn't get answered today. And thanks everyone for being with me. This was really fun. We'll do it again in 3 weeks. Yay!